right, guys, so the rankings come out, and I wanted to break down, what I think is going to be the most interesting discussion, and we're going to get ahead of it, and we're going to take about 7 or 8 minutes here on Slaughterhouse Sports, and I really want to hear your guys' opinion of this. We're going to talk about some hypotheticals and then what we believe will happen. I got to say, I really do like a 4-team playoff. I like the 4-team playoff, and I'm also going to miss the conferences. I'm going to miss having the Pac-12, having the ACC, the Big Ten. Even divisions are okay. I'm going to miss all of this. And then adding the 12 teams, that Oregon-Washington game, that Texas-Oklahoma Red River shootout game, those games had all the luster of them because of the playoffs, because they're elimination games. Ole Miss LSU was on fire. Oklahoma State is going to be so good. If Oklahoma State beats Oklahoma in Bedlam, then guess what? Then Oklahoma is dead in the playoffs. But for a 12-team playoff, they'll get in. Let everybody into the playoff. Let everybody in. Everybody gets to win. It's participation sort of deal. It's not an elite club to get in a 12-team playoff. You're going to have teams like UCLA that lost to Oregon State. You're going to have teams like an Oregon State that loses to Arizona, but who cares? Who cares? You're in the playoff anyway. Alabama goes and loses to Texas. It's all right. We'll see them down the line in the playoffs. It devalues September and October, devalues the season. You see it in the NFL. Who gives a crap that Joe Burrow sucks in September? Joe Burrow's like a bear. He hibernates in September and half through October. My calf is bothering me. We're still trying to get a rhythm. Now you look up in the Bengals, they're fine. You look at Buffalo, they can lose games to teams they're not supposed to at all. Buffalo goes to Jackson, goes to London, and wherever they're playing NFL games. And the great thing about college football is the urgency that you have to win every week or you're done. The threshold of making the college football playoff or making the BCS was so rigid and so tough that only the elite of the elite are going to survive. And like a team like Penn State, we lost to Ohio State. But that Ohio State-Penn State game was so incredible because the urgency will be lost. So that's a little playoff rant. You guys can really disagree with me on that. You guys can disagree. Listen, I hear your point, having Kansas State make the playoffs, for my friends in Manhattan that are watching the show, that's cool. For my friends in Kansas State that are watching, or Oklahoma State, having those teams kind of make the playoffs is interesting. And even a Utah now that has 2 losses, I get it. It expands some stuff to make those games important. But I kind of like 4, or if not, make it 6. Make it 6, 5 conference champions, which again now is all going to be jumbled up in a group of 5. But now the sport of college football, in terms of its regionality, in terms of the ACC now having a team in Dallas and having a team in Palo Alto and having a team in Berkeley, is totally wild and totally crazy that we're going to be seeing, what are we going to be seeing? We're going to be seeing Georgia Tech playing Stanford in Palo Alto as in a conference game. But I digress, right? So here we go. I know you got through 4 minutes of rant for now, the commentary of the playoff. Let's just say now Oregon goes 12-1. All right. They win every game. The thing about Oregon that I love, guys, is outside the Texas Tech game, maybe Washington to some degree, they're blasting every opponent. I mean, even Washington State wasn't up to the standard. And this has happened even last year. Last year, they went to Arizona. They killed Arizona. They killed Cal. They killed Stanford. Like, all the teams they're supposed to beat, they're like what the old Alabama was. Like, these games are over, really, really quickly. Like, Colorado was like 36-7. Like, they're blasting teams. They're doing a hell of a job of getting out and really blasting teams and taking them out. Michigan is doing that as well. Michigan is achieving that threshold. Florida State lately, Florida State's looked really, really good lately. And Florida State has one of the best offenses in the country. I mean, you have Johnny Wilson, you have Keon Coleman, Jordan Travis at quarterback, Malik Benson at running back. That offense can be just as good as Oregon. It's better than Michigan. It's right up there with LSU in terms of the best offense. And then you got Jared Verse and you got some NFL guys on defense. It's totally a playoff worthy team. If they were to play Alabama, I would take Florida State. If they were to play Texas, I believe I would also take Florida State in that matchup. So Florida State. So this is the easy part. Georgia, most likely. I mean, Georgia's non-con is that good, but not that good. But Georgia still went to Florida, who's a decent SEC, and they blasted them. They've had to go to Auburn. Like, Georgia still has been incredibly impressive, what they did to Kentucky at home. Michigan this year has been a machine. You could say what you want about Connor Stallions and him getting the Central Michigan gear, and that's a hysterical story in its own right. That is funny. Maybe it's not funny if you're Central Michigan, but again, like these are signals. What I would do with Michigan, in all honesty, is I wouldn't punish any of the players that are on this team this year. It's not their fault. I would have Michigan still in the college football playoff. But what you're seeing with Michigan, Jim Harbaugh, possibly being suspended up to a season maximum next year, that could really be in question. The future of Connor Stallion's employment at Michigan, unfortunately, he's going to be a fall guy. And then if you're going to give a bowl ban to Michigan next year and allow these guys to transfer out or stay, I think that's totally fair. But to punish the guys on this team and not give them a chance to compete for a championship, I don't think that I don't think that is fair whatsoever. I don't think Michigan is just winning because they're able to get signs. Like, they physically dominate you at the line of scrimmage. They're a great football team, and they're well coached, and the players are great on their team. So you got Michigan, you got Ohio State, you have Florida State, and then you have Oregon and Texas. So those are, and then Washington. I'm forgetting about Washington. The thing is about Washington is Washington could have easily lost to Arizona State. I mean, they were down and they barely beat Arizona State. Their non-con was not good. Michigan State ends up being terrible. Even Texas Tech that Oregon had to beat is better than Michigan State. Washington almost went to Stanford and lost at Stanford. I mean, that was a terrible effort. Their defense is falling apart rapidly. They're lucky to survive these games. They're not playing definitive winning football at all. I mean, Oregon, I'm so glad that Oregon's going to get a chance to play Washington again, because if Oregon converted one of those couple third downs, then Oregon would have, been very high up in the playoff rankings, but that's not how it works. And also, if Texas rematched Oklahoma, it'd be the same way. So I already am clear that Georgia and Florida State, if they're undefeated, they're going to be in the playoff. And Georgia, if they go undefeated, they're probably going to be the number one team in the playoff. Actually, if Michigan or Ohio State, probably the Big Ten is honestly going to be number one, and then Georgia's going to be number two, because Georgia actually, the top of the Big Ten, or the caliber of like a Penn State and an Ohio State and a Michigan, is just higher than maybe what you're going to have to face in the SEC. So that's going to be a debate who's going to be number one. Florida State needs to go undefeated. If they lose, they're done, because unfortunately the ACC has really bottomed out. I mean, Clemson's not been very good. Florida State's lost to Georgia Tech. They've all kind of eaten each other. North Carolina's fallen off a cliff in the past couple of weeks. Gene Chizik, that defense just totally fizzled out, and it's been a mockery up there in North Carolina. They lost to Georgia Tech. They let Haynes King, it's like Haynes King is playing in Longview, Texas again. It's ridiculous. They let Haynes King is still throwing for yardage. I mean, it is despicable. That defense has turned to absolute mush. It's horrible what is going on with North Carolina football right now. So the ACC is nothing. That win against LSU is damn good. That win against Clemson, I know Clemson turned out to be nothing, but that version of Clemson early in the year with that defensive line intact to go there to Death Valley and win, Florida State I'm impressed by. All right, Georgia and then the undefeated Big Ten champion, whether it be Ohio State or Michigan. I don't know if Michigan's going to lose to Penn State, but those are your three. So then it comes down to one spot. It's going to come down to either 11-1 Ohio State, 11-1 Michigan, probably a Big 12 champion, one-loss Texas, or Oregon. So Texas might get to avenge the loss to Oklahoma, but Oklahoma hasn't looked very good. They're like North Carolina kind of. They're like Washington. Okay, UCF should have beat them, and then Kansas beat them. So, and then you look at Texas, they barely survived Houston. They still have these hiccup games, and Kansas State, unfortunately, I don't know if Kansas State can travel and beat Texas. I really do think that Oregon, as a champion of the Pac-12, as a one-loss champion, I'm putting them over Texas, and I'm also putting them over a one-loss team that does not win the Big Ten. So unfortunately for Ohio State, I know you went to Notre Dame and won, and that's a really impressive win. I know you beat Penn State. I know you have a great defense. But unfortunately, Georgia, Florida State are better. And then Oregon's whole resume is going to be better, and I'll explain. Like, Oregon went to Utah and won. Went to Utah, won a really tough game. They've played Washington State, and they've handled, they handled Washington State. They're going to probably get a win over Washington, which is really important. I know that they played Texas Tech. They also, they hammered Stanford. The game wasn't even remotely competitive. And they also beat Colorado on their schedule. So I know you could say, that's the bottom of the Pac-12. But let me tell you who they still got. Oregon still has to play USC. They still have to play the defending Heisman Trophy champion. I know USC doesn't have a great defense. You still got to win that game. Guess what Oregon then has to do? They then have to win the Civil War, and I know that Oregon State just lost again, but Oregon State is still a really good team. I know that I just talked about the 12-team playoff and how Oregon State would still get in. Listen, being a top 15, top 10 team like Oregon State's a really good team. So again, going to Utah, playing Oregon State, playing USC, playing Colorado, playing another rematch against Washington and those kind of weapons. Like, if you're the Pac-12 champion, this league is great. Arizona's had a really good year this year. UCLA. So the Pac-12 South is really good. Arizona State's a team that, by the way, that no one's going to discount for, but they have one of the best defensive coordinators in the country. They have one of the best young coaches in the country who was just at Oregon. And the Oregon margin of victory, you want to talk about a Michigan's playing well. Michigan hasn't played anybody either by those standards. Oregon kills everybody. I mean, Oregon's team from top to bottom, you got a Heisman Trophy winner at quarterback. Your defense is phenomenal. Defensive line, Hugo Longalale, Brandon Dorlus. I mean, this team is honestly hitting on all cylinders. And then eye test, and then in terms of style points or whatever, and they don't even need style points. They could have probably hung 50 on Utah if they kept the pedal down. They're winning. Their margin of victory is probably in the 30s. I mean, that is a playoff caliber football team. It really is. If Oregon were to play Florida State, guess who would be favored? Oregon would be favored. If Oregon were to play Ohio State, guess who would win that game? Oregon would, because Oregon has more offense than Ohio State. Okay, so you got Georgia, you have Michigan. These are the teams that I think are going to be in the playoff. Now, Michigan still has to go to Penn State and win. That's going to be a tough environment. But guess what? I think then Michigan's going to go out there and beat Ohio State. So I got Georgia, I got Florida State, I got Michigan, and then I got Oregon in there. And then just off, I got the one-loss team who did not win the Big Ten championship. And I also got Texas. Unfortunately, just the Big 12 isn't as good. And this is a year where you have an undefeated Florida State, and that's really, putting we'll have to see if they roll undefeated. But Florida State being undefeated, unless they get tripped up by Florida, that is really making this a difficult decision. And listen, the 14 playoff, it is very compelling because these are all great teams. They should all be fantastic semifinal matchups. They're all worthy teams. Even teams like Texas and Ohio State that would get left out in that scenario are all worthy as well. So it's very close. It's not like Oregon is an absolute shoo-in. Like, they obviously can't lose again, and they got to put it on Cal pretty good this week, and then they got to continue through USC and all these other programs. All right, but getting a win at Rice-Eccles against a Utah team that's been pretty solid, and then you're going to play the Civil War against Oregon State, it still is a really good Pac-12, USC. It's better than the Big Ten Conference. So your one-loss Big Ten team that is not going to Indianapolis from the East, I'm taking Oregon. And then is it better? Is the Pac-12 better than the Big 12? It still is. I mean, the Big 12 doesn't have big wins out of conference other than Texas beating Alabama. I mean, Oklahoma State's still involved. West Virginia, Kansas State lost to Missouri. It's up there for debate, right? That's why it's interesting. It's not a slam dunk who's going to be the fourth team in the Final Four. You're taking a Big Ten, you're taking an SEC, and then if Florida State goes undefeated. If Florida State loses, then Oregon gets in comfortably, and then you're talking about probably Texas versus Ohio State. So this is going to be really interesting to see how this rolls out. I'll title this video, "Let me know what y'all think about how the playoffs should be seeded."